Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening. Exceptional Radio. Hello, it's February 16th, 2020, and you wouldn't believe it, but it's almost 50 degrees outside in sunny Bloomington, Indiana. I want to repeat that. It's February 16, 2020. It's 48 degrees outside. The sun is shining. It's actually quite incredible out. You know, one of the things that I've found most interesting is this winter being so mild is that when it gets wet out, you know, I've seen worms coming out.
Yeah.
Worms coming out in the middle of, like, winter.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, worms and all kinds of
slugs, the fuzzies, they're everywhere.
Yeah, there's definitely, I've seen mosquitoes even, like a month ago. It was a brief week where I was hoping the frost would come back and get them. But, I mean, I even saw a carpenter be out. It died very quickly, but it was definitely confused.
Poor bastards.
Yeah.
I wonder sometimes what's really going on. Like, what's the trigger that causes, all of these critters to decide, like, oh, it's time. And, like, I feel like there ought to be some extra, I don't know, birds have, like, magnetic drive, so they know it's like, hey, I got to go this way at some point during the year. And so they're not just guided by...
It's not just heat or
heat or daylight. Surely smaller organisms. I mean, humans instinctively know these things too. We just ignore the telltale signs.
Well, because they've done tests where they take away the light indicators, and people are still aware of the circadian rhythm associated with their normal daily routine. So
it's not just light.
No, there has to be other things that are indicating the daily cycle.
Yeah. I'm actually really, really sensitive to UV. Like, I know it's going to be a high UV index day really early on. And surely there's a way that our skin gives us information too.
Yeah.
It's not just our eyes.
Right. Well, my eyes water excessively, though, when it's really high UV index. Like, at the same time, I know what you mean, because I know there's times when my skin is, it radiates cool versus heat, and that there's a difference, and it's not always like depending on the temperature.
Now that you mention it, there was a brief period of time when I was exploring infrared photography, and I noticed that at certain times of the day, and then also certain times of the year, people's skin would just be dramatically different. And I'm sure that there's, angle of incidence of infrared light and shutter speed and all of those granular things. But at the same time, does skin pH change that much? Does it swing that much, or does the skin's texture change that much with temperature?
I mean, I'm sure it does, because the pores are going to change size dramatically.
That's true.
So it's going to make it more or less difficult for toxins to escape, and that's going to change the...
Yeah.
I mean, whether it's just sebaceous glands and oil or whatever.
Yeah. Actually, we've talked about how, like, we've had experienced seasonal, like, earwax and hair texture changes, and so that makes sense.
Yeah, I get more pimples during the summer, like, on my body.
Yeah.
Whereas during the
drier months,
the drier, colder months, my skin's like really, really clear. I don't get near as many ingrown hairs or anything.
Yeah. If it weren't for the high static days, the winter is when my hair is the most compliant.
Well, and I was also thinking about one of the things I've noticed walking a lot during winter is that the way your, I don't know if it's your plasma or your blood, but in the same way that large bodies of water change temperature slowly, I'm wondering if over the course of winter our natural temperature drops because our plasma drops because we're more exposed to cold more frequently, versus summer where the plasma is at a higher temperature, and how much that affects our daily routines or operation as an individual. Because that's, this is getting back to, I know when I walk outside into an environment that's heated, then it's like my body's radiating cold, and that's getting back to the notion of there's different times when my body will radiate heat versus cold, and that's kind of where I'm not positive what's the cause, and is I don't think it's as simple as, oh, I'm moving from an environment that's colder to one's hotter, or vice versa. Like I'm saying, I think there's more to the time it takes for our plasma to change temperatures, because it's ultimately it's not a single body, but it probably operates more like a single body
Yeah.
than not.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, I know that core body temperature is supposed to drop a little bit when we sleep. And so, I've read over the years numerous articles about, lower your room temperature when it's time to go to bed.
Hmm.
And
For
but then,
better sleep.
yeah, but then there's also this component of temperature regulation where might be able to achieve an optimal room temperature, but if your body doesn't retain heat uh, in a consistent way, like if you're built in such a way that you radiate more heat from your feet and you get hot in your feet, there are other considerations.
Hmm.
So it's not just like a one size fit all blanket.
Right. Well, even with that, um, I have like there's a gel insert in my pillow that is supposed to cool my head when I sleep,
Hmm.
which it definitely does. But it's like shit like that where I don't know if other people even need that type of thing in their sleep process to, because otherwise, if I don't have shit that's cooling me down, I overheat and
Yeah.
then sweat a ton. So like I'll have to have one leg hanging out of the blanket or some shit when I
Mm.
fall asleep, or like, like I said, the cooling pillow.
So I wonder. Hmm. I wonder if there's a way to direct airflow through a bed without causing it to overcool. Like build a fan. Those door fans that are basically like a column fan that turned on
Hmm.
their side, used as like a air curtain. So maybe like a really low speed air curtain.
Well, the like an air hockey table, how they have air holes through it. If somebody made a blanket that had those kind of holes where you could regulate what air temperature is flowing
Mm.
through, so it's like a constant flow of air, but it's not gonna be
Yeah, like
cold necessarily. You can modify the temperature.
I've always been amused by the uh, Tempur-Pedic foam, the memory foam, the viscoelastic foam mattresses, where they say we've added air channels for cooling,
Hmm.
and then when you see somebody on them, they actually just flatten almost completely, and those air channels pretty much disappear.
Right.
I know that there's some really advanced foam beds like Purple, and they've got this fancy egg crate thing going on, and so I think that might actually be a different type of air channeling.
Hmm.
It's really crazy the kind of technology that's being pumped into beds now. I
Yeah.
remember, you know, 30 years ago, I guess, when I was a kid, when I was single digits, it was all like really, the foam wasn't very good if it was foam, or it was a spring mattress. And those were the beds that were around. And then I feel like in the 90s, the Tempur-Pedic thing really took off
Hmm.
because, and they touted, NASA foam and
Yeah.
all these other things. But now, you can get a memory foam mattress at practically any place that sells bedding. Like you can get them at Sam's Club and
Right.
Bed Bath and Beyond and
Yeah.
Walmart.
I mean, but that's the benefit of having government-funded inventions that
Oh
then the
yeah,
patents are then open.
yeah, absolutely.
You know, because
Yeah.
that's like
Well, only
a direct translation of what that type of investment life cycle results in. It's like
yeah, but only a government-sized entity is willing to take on that kind
right,
of
and it's
that time length of risk. It
for
takes a
sure
long time to develop something like that and then bring it to the masses.
because then that's where you turn around and you have queen size foam mattresses for $150 or some shit.
Are you familiar with the Alaskan King? It's like
Yeah,
two queen size
yeah,
mattresses. What kind of? It's
it's
just
insane.
ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, but that's America for you because again, you get to this point where
That's a bed that
I
Shaq
mean,
sleeps on sideways.
well, but then you go back and look at beds for the early 1900s,
Oh, they
and
were
people
tiny.
were smaller. Period.
Yeah.
So you do have this element of now that our nutrition is more informed and better, people are generally bigger scientifically, but at the same time, there is this culture of excess where then you have people who want to have room-sized beds that the whole entire room is a mattress, and I guess that's cool, but at the end of the day, there's this the excess is meant to be a display of excess and doesn't actually do anything but display excess. Once the bed is bigger than your body, there's not much else you can do with that extra space except look at it.
The Chinese lasted a long time until the opulence of the Song Dynasty basically ruined the court. It
Hmm.
bankrupted them. That and they were trying
I mean, it
to
happens with a lot
maintain
of
a war with the Mongolians. So.
that seems to happen with a lot of empires where a single generation will come along and just through opulence or uh, neglect or whatever will just destroy the treasury and the coffers, and then you'll have these big opulent displays to an empire's downfall where again you have all these historical
Yeah.
points where in order to try to galvanize the people, the leader will take on a big ego project and build something like a Taj Mahal
Or a Colosseum.
yeah, or a Coliseum or some shit like that.
Or flood the Colosseum and put boats in it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, but at the same time, we mock the Coliseum, but our football stadiums are all bigger than the Coliseum now.
That's true. We don't flood our football fields intentionally. Do we?
Ice capades.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's where they do that stuff.
I
I thought they
mean,
used hockey rinks
well,
for
they
that.
sometimes.
I guess
but
hockey rinks wouldn't be big enough.
It depends on the size of the show.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
that's where again they don't always do ice capades at fucking ice rinks.
Yeah, no, that makes more sense.
Because they used to do the ice capades at Market Square Arena, which was the basketball stadium, not the Pepsi Coliseum, which was the ice stadium in Indianapolis.
Yeah,
But again, there's not much difference in that.
no, there really isn't. I had completely forgotten that ice capades were a thing.
Yeah, for a brief period. I don't know if they still are, but they definitely were. That's like this the same. In fact, it's almost a step further. We're gonna bring this water inside and freeze it.
No, it's more opulent. We're gonna freeze it, and then we're gonna bring in exceedingly highly trained performers
Yeah.
who can perform on sharpened pieces of metal attached to their feet.
Yep. Which does, and in that, I guess there's, on the one hand, at least Coliseum stuff is combat, where I don't even know what ice skating. It's art, you know. I guess like that's not a problem um, at all. But when you have that being the result of what's being displayed, it's on the one hand, it's good that they're doing art, but on the other hand, it's disingenuous because there's still a military industrial machine
I,
that's putting on
I
the.
think that Ice Capades is a performative expression of a highly technical skill, a highly technical athletic ability that's developed over years of training. And there is a very complex choreographed element to it. So somewhere, one of the designers of that kind of thing is definitely an artist. But at some point, that entire production relies completely on the execution of technicians, and they have to do their job flawlessly, like like a well-oiled machine. They have to become the clock that is the Ice Capades for that whole show to come off just right. And at that point, it's a design aspect. And then of course, it's truly a display of, hey, let's do this so we can make some money.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I don't think that I don't think Ice Capades exist to provide a platform to develop culture on a broad scale. I think it's still a very exclusive, exclusionary uh, microcosm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Which is why it's not really
It's
it's like pseudo culture
yeah.
because then on top of that,
It's a hallmark.
forced. Well, this gets back to, so we were looking at the trending topics today on. I was looking on my Twitter display, and my lady was looking on her Twitter display. We have the exact same trending topics, even though it's supposed to be based on who you're following, supposedly.
Huh.
And one of the trending topics was how I found the G spot today, apparently all over America. But when you realize that it has nothing to do with who you actually follow, it's a completely forced, quote unquote, trending topic. And Twitter decides.
Please tell me that the G Spot is like a weed shop in LA, like with like a Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre Easy
Right, yeah.
themed hosts. Like,
Oh my God.
'cause that would be fucking awesome.
Man, well, you're getting into advertising plants now. That I saw a Lil Nas X video. I always watch stuff on mute to really get a sense of what's going on visually. And what struck me about this music video was 1 second there's a Doritos bag, and then the next second there's Estee Lauder makeup. And it's only on the screen for like a second a piece. But I'm looking at this music video like, why the fuck is a Doritos bag and then Estee Lauder makeup in a music video? I mean, obviously it's product placement, but we're getting at a point where if products are so shameless that they're doing product placement in the open in the middle of music videos now. I mean, I don't think this is the first time, but it's so blatant where you're like, what the fuck is it? Why am I watching a Doritos commercial or a music video or an Estee Lauder commercial? And then when it happens, it's like this weird cultural break where, you know, we're not having a line in between music videos and advertisements now. Come here, Brew.
Come here, buddy. What are you doing? Bruce.
No idea. He's in But the line between what is an advertisement and what is organic has been so increasingly blurred that if there's not a critical eye, people are going to be looking at advertisements thinking that they're looking at a music video or a TV show or a sitcom or whatever form of media has become this transparent method of advertising. Because I mean, if you go,
I
sorry.
think that's the reason that science fiction is so difficult to really sell, is because
Right.
how do you predict the products of the future that people are still going to use?
Yeah.
I mean, Demolition Man was brilliant about it. After the franchise wars, Taco Bell was the only one that remained. So it was easy for them to build a story of how they still use Taco Bell as a restaurant in the future,
Yeah.
because that would be the only thing that would survive.
I mean, but then there's this concept of why do brands have to be the same in the future, if not just to establish a similar context to which the viewer can be part of and not have to extend their creativity? Because if we have McDonald's in the future, or we have Hardee's and Taco Bell in the future, what does the viewer have to do to imagine anything about that? There's nothing that they have to imagine. They just have to assume that those parts of the present are going to be the same in the future, or maybe the people at McDonald's are going to wear lit up visors or something. They just change one element about that same thing, but it doesn't actually.
I like the idea that they did in Human Traffic, where they showed a bunch of people behind McDonald's countertops doing the robot. And it was, I took it as a metaphor for a future automation where humans were essentially emulating robots, because that was the direction we were headed.
Yeah.
Eventually, McDonald's won't have employees; it'll have machines spitting out our burgers.
I mean, they already have tested those machines, and they
work really well. Oh man, speaking of fast food machines, in I'm pretty sure it's Korea, but it might also be Japan or Hong Kong or Taiwan. But there are machines that will make these big, delicious-looking bowls of noodles, and they contain all manner of cool ingredients. You can change out your noodle types, ingredient types. The protein content is in a sealed pouch that they spit it into the thing, and it mixes in. And when it's done, it rides a little conveyor belt in a little disposable dish. You watch them make them. They are incredible looking. If that's space food, people don't. I think people just need to realize what an industrialized food process is capable of delivering, as opposed to the I don't even know what to call it. It's like food substitutes.
Yeah.
It's catching up. I've seen some really interesting industrial food products come out in the last few years that look real, and sometimes they even taste all right. They taste like they might work.
I mean, but this is coming from. It's like we're acting as if Twinkies are handmade or something.
God, can you imagine a bespoke Twinkie?
Right. It would be a completely different
absolutely
outcome that's going to taste 1,000 times better. But we're living in a society where people eat Twinkies normally, and those things are treats. Those factory machine created products are treats in this modern society. It would be different if Twinkies were punishments or something that only dogs ate, or it was something that the people who had no option to eat anything were forced to eat Twinkies. But that's not how it is. People eat Twinkies voluntarily. They go buy them voluntarily as if they haven't been made by machines for 60 years.
In the movie Mortal Engines, I don't know if you've seen it or not, there's this scene where our protagonist and her unwitting helper are trying to flee capture from agents of London. And at one point they find themselves in this kind of dugout trench thing, and the protagonist sits down and starts eating a Twinkie, of all things. And so her companion looks at her like he's like hungry, hasn't eaten in a while, and so she tosses him the second Twinkie, and he looks at it and he says, "This expired 1,000 years ago." And she says something like, "Is like the food of the ancient doesn't spoil. It's eternal," or something like
Yeah.
that. And it's like,
It's like in Zombieland,
Yeah.
which again, it's like, this is the people who eat Twinkies not thinking about the fact that they're made by a machine. Basically, it's fake food. Then they're gonna complain about the hamburger from McDonald's not having human hands make it.
that's true, but they might complain about it being an Impossible Burger.
I mean, yeah, they would complain about either one. It's the weirdest shit. Those same people are the same, like those are the same demographic. It's the same Venn diagram.
Yeah.
Won't eat an Impossible Burger. Won't eat a fucking burger made out of a machine. Also eats Twinkies and drinks 64-ounce fucking Cokes. It's the same Venn diagram.
They might as well have like an IV of barbecue sauce while they're at it, right?
But then they would complain if there's Impossible Pork, Impossible Barbecue.
Even though Impossible Pork is
Gonna be delicious.
testing so well.
I mean, but there's this weird cultural need for either something to die or somebody to suffer for it to be a masculine meal. I don't even know what else. I don't even know what other
Masculine meal.
Because let's dissect
Wait,
this.
hold on. Let me think about this for a second. I'm imagining like some large T-bone
Steak and eggs is a masculine
and
breakfast.
with a side of lamb chops
Right.
slathered in bacon, and then there is a corn on the cob on a different plate. But I'm not actually going to eat it. It's just there to balance the color.
And a whole loaf of garlic bread.
There's a whole loaf of garlic bread.
Not just one piece, a whole loaf.
And it's covered in butter.
Yeah.
Like completely soaked in butter.
And then a pile of mashed potatoes and a fucking boat of gravy.
Yeah, like a coffee pot.
Like a boat of gravy.
Like an oil tanker of gravy. and let's see. I'm not going to have a beer with this. Actually, I'm going to have a giant beer with this. And I'm going to have a giant Coke.
And a cigar.
And a cigar. And like a
whiskey.
A whiskey.
Yeah.
Like a big old, big glass of whiskey.
Yeah. That's what a masculine meal.
I don't think that I would actually eat the bread, though. I would just want it there because I would want people to think that I was going to eat the bread.
You throw away half the shit. That's what's masculine about it, too. You don't fucking clean your plate because that's what little kids do.
I probably wouldn't even drink much more than a few sips of the beer to cleanse the palate. Really, I would only drink the Coke. But I would want the beer there because, giant beer.
And then you throw it up all later just because you're drunk and you didn't.
Oh, yeah. Well, the steak was undercooked because, it's got to be bloody. And, and who actually has the stomach for that and drinking and all the other, all the butter.
But those are the people that will then not eat a burger that's made by a machine.
Even though the burger that's made by the machine is, consistent every time and has been, determined through some kind of extensive research process that this is the idealized burger. I've participated in food studies where you go and you sit down and eat, well, they tell you to only take 2 to 3 bites of the sandwich and then start answering questions. But I remember watching people eat the entire sandwich. I watched a person eat 3 gigantic, what would eventually become some deluxe Chick-fil-A sandwich. All 3 of them.
Mm-mm.
The first one was all right, but the second one wasn't very good. And I went for another one, a pizza study, and I think that ended up becoming a Pizza Hut. And that pizza was delicious. And I was tempted to eat every slice because it was so good.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't do that because you won't be able to taste anything,
Yeah.
and then you'll be bloated because the pizza expands in your stomach later. Because
Well, now what they do is do that shit just on the shelves, and we're in a test market here. I mean, they still do those focus group tests, but
yeah, I
you'll
think the
see.
focus groups are for the late stage of the process when they're
Right.
really trying to refine it. Because the difference between those chicken sandwiches was like, I don't know, maybe a quarter of a teaspoon of seasoning on between two of them, and then the other one had a slightly more toasted bun. It was all such minimal variation that what they were I couldn't really tell what they were trying to hone in on. They all
Hmm.
seemed the same.
Well, it's like they had this period where they were putting out all these different flavors of potato chips, and there would be
Yeah.
like sausage and gravy, sausage gravy and biscuits, or gyros, or I saw one that was cappuccino flavored.
Oh, that's just wrong.
It was. I mean, I didn't try it,
Oh
but
my
that's
god.
just wrong. It's again, why would? But somebody's in the fucking flavor department's got a new idea for
Do you remember
cappuccino
when
flavor.
everything was sriracha flavored?
Yeah.
That was one of those like weak moments that I think that sriracha is really interesting to cook with, and it's okay to put on a few things, but it's not ketchup. And even ketchup's not supposed to be put on everything. And I don't even think people realize that if you take a small amount of ketchup and cook with it, all of a sudden you get this really dynamic and dimensional flavor that emerges as a result of cooking with vinegar and tomato and some sugar.
Yeah.
It's a really, really unique sauce that has a lot more potential than just, refrigerated and then applied to French fries or a burger at the end stages when it's capable of delivering so much more.
Well, and this is where the difference between ketchup and catsup.
Yes.
I was always wondering that as a kid, but then that's less sugar ultimately, and that's kind of where.
There's also a Chinese version of catsup, which is more. I think it's more pasty, but it's like a cooking sauce.
Yeah.
It's almost identical in terms of the ingredients.
Yeah, almost.
But it's
It's proportions.
yeah, the proportions are a little different, and it's really meant to cook. You can cook your vegetables with it, or your shrimp, or your pork, or
Yeah, it'll
your,
taste weird, a little off on a hot dog.
But it wouldn't be right on a hot dog. But you might be able to cook it into a sauce and then apply that to a Chinese sausage, and then it might be delicious.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there are all these sauces that I feel like we use culturally in a highly concentrated form, like all of the barbecue sauces. Not only do we concentrate it, but we put them in a smoker and then further concentrate them onto the surface of a meat in hopes that a little bit of it will be absorbed into the surface of the meat.
Yeah, which I think, as Neil Brennan said, meat is just a sauce delivery mechanism.
Yeah.
Which, when you're like, huh, that's kind of true.
Half the time I feel like actually almost every time I go out to a restaurant and then the option is soup or salad, I'll get the soup because at least there's a chance that it'll be interesting. Because I'm not really interested in a pile of leaves that have been sitting in a giant pile of leaves right next to a busy workspace where people are constantly moving around and digging their hands into, even if they use tongs or if they wash their hands or even put gloves on. I'm just not into that kind of level of like handling. I feel like that's where people get E. coli. But I felt like salads at a restaurant are really just a way to deliver the chef's vinaigrette or their buttermilk ranch, their house buttermilk ranch, or whatever dressing that they have decided is their specialty. Like, that's what the salad's really for.
Yeah.
It's to zap your taste buds with some vinegar and wake you up and get your taste buds ready to enjoy a delicious meal.
Yeah, I think any salad of substance that isn't just leaves it's gonna have things in it that are then not necessarily quote unquote healthy. Which is then even the sauces, you know, a lot of these vinaigrettes can have like a lot of sugar in them sometimes. But then well, and then the creamy sauces too get high fat content. So
Or like if you get a real Caesar dressing that contains anchovies, that's a lot of salt.
Yeah.
But sodium might not be all that bad. It might just be, concentrations, or maybe even like the kind of salt or the way you're getting it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more concentration than the sodium itself, because the issue is that...
I mean, our cells need them to function.
Right, but we don't need 3,000, 4,000 of our daily percentage in one meal. Because that's the problem with like Cheesecake Factory. If you look at the sodium content of Cheesecake Factory stuff, it's 2,000% of your fucking daily.
That's not right.
Yeah, you know.
Why does cheesecake have that much salt in it?
No, not the cheesecake, but I'm saying their meals.
Oh.
They have food there, and they just blast it with sodium, because I think what ends up happening is if you are going...
Is that part of that whole trans fat scare? When they're like, we got to get rid of all the fat now, let's pump sodium into everything.
I don't know. I think it's more so that if you're about to eat a really sugary meal, you have to blast your taste buds with salt in order for it to be balanced. Because it's this thing where it's one of those extremes.
Oh yeah.
Where if you have
man, the Japanese
undersalted
totally
stuff
with ginger,
and then have Cheesecake Factory is gonna blow out your taste buds. Like the cheesecake is gonna blow out your taste buds. Whereas if you have because then they start you off with the bread, they slowly ramp you up. So it doesn't go right into the entree. They ramp you up with the bread and butter, which some of the butter has some sugar in it anyway. That they have. It's like sweet butter. Maybe sweet cream butter or some shit. But they ramp up the taste buds gradually, and then by the time you get to your fucking cheesecake, everything is at its peak, ready to be effectively blown out. But because there's still... It's weird, man. There's an art to overstimulating taste buds but still preserving taste. Because when you have chocolate, once it gets to a certain point, it just tastes like sweet. But if you keep it under a certain level, you still taste the chocolate, the cocoa, the element that makes it chocolate flavor. Or in some cases, it'll be like a combination of hazelnut and vanilla that your brain is recognizing as the chocolate. But then...
I really like the practice of putting hot pepper into the chocolate.
Yeah. I mean, it's different, but this again gets back to the whole notion of if you stimulate the non-sweet taste buds in a certain way, then it makes it the sweeter stuff taste sweeter, in the same way that I would always see my grandma eating salt with her watermelon. Well, eventually I tried it. If you don't put too much salt on it, it makes the watermelon sweeter. You don't taste the salt.
You know, I put salt on grapefruit and watermelon.
But there's something about... But as long as you keep the salt below a certain level, it makes sweeter things taste sweeter.
Yeah.
Because you're getting a contrast of flavor. It's not even that your taste buds are the point. It's that your brain is understanding these things in a way that makes the sweet taste sweeter, but it cancels out the salt taste in the process, even though it hits your taste buds. So that's where chefs are using these tricks of the brain, consciously or not. But then you get these molecular chefs or...
Oh, molecular gastronomy.
Yeah, molecular gastronomy.
That stuff's incredible.
But this is... What they're doing is applying the science behind all of it to the point where the molecules that are hitting your palate are going to elicit a certain response, and it's very calculated.
I remember listening to this molecular gastronomist talked about the tools that he had to have developed so that he could make the food that he wanted to make.
Hmm.
And one of it was this like special mixing dish apparatus that also heated up what was being mixed to a certain temperature so that it would bind properly. And
Hmm.
then how that had to be transferred into a special oven where uh, it could be a solution would be applied as it was also rising up in temperature. And at the end, he like flashes it with a torch, and like turns it into a candy. Like caramelizes a piece of like a thin piece of cinnamon stick, I think, but turned into like candy through like a weird process, chemical process with heat,
Hmm.
just heat and chemicals, and turned a piece of what amounts to wood into candy. That is just mind blowing type stuff.
Yeah.
And then when they will take the essence of food and then turn into like a foam, and so it's like a weightless but completely complex flavor profile. I think you know that's it right there. Once they can develop the flavor profile and then get to it through a different means, because we know how to make different things through different methods. That that foam should be able to be applied to almost any kind of delivery mechanism. You know,
Hmm.
salad is a delivery mechanism for salad dressing. If we have the right kind of plant matter, and it's made properly, or yeah, if it's just prepared properly, we should be able to infuse the flavor foam and combine a complex flavor profile with a sustainable foodstuff that you know doesn't cause people to have really complex digestive issues.
Hmm. And then, as you're talking about it, you could have. It's like if we can focus on flavor profile, we can also focus on texture profile.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, visual profile. There's all these different aspects of developing
And
food.
they don't have to wait for each other either.
Right, no. And they don't have to be done at the same time
Yeah.
for the final product to then work. Because I think there's this element of,
Oh, of everything coming together to make it to market in at a on a timeline.
right.
Well, that's just my whole life I've always felt like there wasn't enough time to do things the right way. There was enough time to get things done to meet the requirements for a class, or there's enough time to do things so that you can satisfy someone's expectations. But I always felt like there wasn't enough time to to really to really examine things and approach them from as many perspectives as possible. And of course, years later, I learned that I was basically in conflict with Western style focused research, where you define your goal and then you go for it, and things might kind of waver back and forth, but it's really kind of driving it home. You kind of get to the point, and the further east you go, you find that there's this almost circular desire to understand things that's willing to take some time.
Hmm.
And I think that it's just like a maturity of a culture type thing.
Well,
Some things take longer to figure out, and maybe people are willing to. There's some people who are willing to go through the time it takes. The contribution might be very minimal, but because it might take longer, but it might be worth it.
and I think in describing that, understanding is not a linear process,
Yeah.
but it's presented as such. This is one of the things that I think.
Well, there are mathematical physics theorems that aren't proven for generations, and then when they're finally proven, it's like, oh yeah, and now you got to know this too, even though we just decided that this 50, 60, 70-year-old idea is actually correct.
Mhm.
It takes a while.
Yeah. Well, and even in that, then you have the people who are resistant to um, absorb the knowledge because that's not what they were taught when they grew up, and they believe that usurps scientific discovery. That's a whole different problem, I think, that I don't know if it's a result of faith-based, what's the word? Faith-based organizations being a huge part of social hierarchy, or if it's just this individual desire to impose one's will on the universe, which I don't know if those two things can be separated, because then I feel like other cultures don't have that same desire to impose one's will uh, on the outside world. Um, that we're not we Western philosophy teaches people from a Judeo-Christian framework that in having the capacity to change the world, that it's our duty to change the world in our image in the same way that God created us in his image. Um, and that's something I'm not sure people can disconnect from themselves unless they acknowledge that it's there. Because then what you have is one of the craziest frameworks is
wildlife management.
right. I mean that alone as a concept is obviously a paradox, but it's those types of things that are like the end result of latent Judeo-Christian philosophy influencing our laws and our um, resources allocation. Like, if we have a department of wildlife management that presumes that we can manage wildlife from the first place, and then on top of that, it takes a whole department and allocates resources to controlling wildlife in a way that then conflicts with the people who are going to then come and pollute and destroy the wildlife with a mandate that's protected from the government as well.
Wildlife management really just means let's figure out how we can make this place safer for humans slowly.
Ultimately,
yeah. I think there's some aspect of it that's like in farmland. I'm sure that there's a more emphasis placed on wildlife management in terms of potential predators.
mm-hmm.
But I think in a place that is deep forest, like the Appalachians, or any kind of wilderness, the idea of managing wildlife in that kind of space, that's just cover for let's allow hunting.
I mean, that's true in a lot of those places.
Because once wildlife start approaching like things like farmland, I think that's different than managing the wildlife in a wilderness environment.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not going to disagree with that.
I'm not talking about like an urban environment where people live, or even like a suburban environment where you have high concentrations of people, because that's not the wilderness. That's not even a place where wildlife should be. I feel like when wildlife ends up in a place like a suburb or an urban environment, it's a mistake.
Right.
And it's not like in Bloomington where we have deer path and deer natural habitat, and this has been the case for, hundreds of years, and human expansion is just moving into their space. And I'm talking about like it takes you half hour, 45 minutes, an hour to actually drive to these places, and then the only time you see signs of life is when you see other people out there hiking, or you see a car parked, or you might see a flashlight at night if you stay out there that long. But you're not going to like look to the sky and see signs of civilization.
Mm-hmm.
So
right. And I think in that, when wildlife management exists in those areas, which that's ultimately the main places they do exist realistically.
I'm not really complaining about hunting. Actually, I think venison tastes fantastic, and I don't think there's a real way to farm deer. I think they're too crafty.
No, but I mean, but the point is, these things end up becoming delusional applications of Judeo-Christian ideology in a way that's also meant to present it as if since it's coming through a government agency, this has nothing to do with Judeo-Christian philosophy.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's completely rooted in Judeo-Christian philosophy, and that's kind of where.
How do we extricate Judeo-Christian philosophy from
Is it even possible?
from Western civilization?
Is it even possible?
It's
so deeply ingrained in
ingrained
everything.
in colonialism. Like all of colonialism
Yeah.
has been to spread.
I mean, think about if there's a TV show, they have an episode based on a holiday. That's that's not being able to avoid the Gregorian calendar and the influence of Judeo-Christian ideology.
Christmas episodes on Legends of Tomorrow.
I mean, they live outside of time.
I know.
They live
I know.
outside of fucking time, but they have goddamn Christmas episodes. And I swear
That's
again,
like the best part.
I mean, even down to Chris Pratt in Guardians of the Galaxy when they're like, "Who is your master?" And he's like, "What am I supposed to say? Jesus Christ?" You know, the idea of somebody who's half God himself worshiping Jesus is fucking. It's absurd. It's absurd. It's funny in the context, but it's like that joke. It's so Judeo-Christian influence is so. Because then even I think Captain America, I think he said some shit like when they're talking about how Loki and Thor are gods, he's not to me or something. He's not one. I only worship one god or something stupid. And again, it's like
Yeah, but the whole point of Captain America, I've decided, is to help young people come to terms with a generation that is unwilling to accept social change.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're gonna say, "Well, not to me, that's not my God," it's like, okay, they're their old timer. It's okay.
Yeah,
That's not what we're actually talking about. No one's threatening your one God status.
right.
It's a story.
No, for sure.
And so,
and that's why.
But that's the thing. I think it's, and we're given Steve Rogers as this example of somebody from a bygone era who still holds these values, and some of the values that he holds are still good. Like, stand up for all that is good, and
I
defend
would
people and who can't, and
I would accept that framing as them doing that consciously if they revisited that and said something about it later, but they visited it the first time and didn't revisit it. So I think like in Civil War, they should have had some line where he's like questioning his faith. No, I mean he should have been questioning his faith when he finds out Bucky, his fucking best friend, killed fucking Tony Stark's parents, and Tony Stark is now the villain that he has to fight. He should have been questioning his faith if he had faith. That would have made his character even more believable.
When they did that in Civil War, in my mind, it was because they were foreshadowing either Secret Wars or Captain America as an agent of Hydra. That's what I thought they were doing, and they didn't do that.
Well, they did.
Well, they kind of did.
Well, they did because we haven't gotten the Captain America Agent Hydra, but he accidentally created that in the elevator now because instead of fighting, he said "Hail Hydra." So technically, he created that whole storyline. We just haven't seen it on screen. So they might have been setting it up.
They might be setting it up. Come on, Disney, you guys can do this.
I think they're smart enough to do that.
Well, they should. They should because they're setting up Secret Wars with the Skrulls. Mm-hmm. They've given us the Skrulls finally, so they've opened the path through Secret Wars, and we've been given this. They've foreshadowed this potential as Hydra, Captain America, and that would be good. I think those would be the stories where we get to see the captain questioning his faith. That's the story where we get to see some old values, I don't know, be expressed in some way, and still. I don't know how Disney's going to do it. They've got an entire department of Imagineers who will figure out how to get from point A to point C.
Yeah. No, I have no doubt in that. It's just a matter of that is it's annoying when looking at a fictional universe having a lore from the real universe influence that fictional universe in a way that's latent and not intentional, but just a byproduct of people not being aware of what influences them. And that's where I think, because like I went back and watched the like the first few episodes of the X-Men cartoon yesterday, and they are so overtly about racism and the problems with society, but in a way that's like, I can't even imagine that shit being acceptable for kids today, even though there's no cuss words or nudity or anything like that. It's not something that
What was so
parents would
strange
allow for
about
kids.
that series was it was right after they created Jubilee in the comics, and she was created as a fire PSA, like don't play with fire, kids, because
they were doing all kinds of PSAs in comics. Yeah.
And then so what I thought was so surreal is they started off X-Men the animated series with a Jubilee story.
Right.
They went straight to Jubilee. I couldn't stand Jubilee as a character, like when I was younger, because it was like, what? Why is she? How? Really? Like, and then the thing that was so interesting is that they jumped right into mainstream. This is what the X-Men look like in this instant. They didn't re-envision the X-Men. They didn't take them back to a previous time. They drew them on screen the way they were drawn in the comics.
Right, in that period.
And they looked cool.
Yeah.
They had like super slick technology. They had near Shi'ar level technology. And they were just, the Blackbird could already go into space.
Yep.
And they had all these really advanced technologies, and then somehow...
Well, they followed the comic book storylines pretty close.
Yeah, they did. But the thing that got me was, like, as soon as they create when the first series of movies came out, it was like they completely re-envisioned the X-Men. And I didn't mind that. I was actually kind of...
I hated it. I fucking hated it.
I didn't mind the way that they re-envisioned it, because I got to see Magneto do some ill shit. And that's all that really mattered to me. Is I want to see... Magneto's my favorite character.
I felt that they did the movie 5 years too early.
Yeah.
And because I didn't even finish that series. I refuse to watch X3 to this day. Fuck that movie.
Oh, yeah, you haven't missed anything.
I mean, I know I didn't, but I'm saying, like...
It's like not even... It's barely an X-Men story. It's more of a Wolverine story.
Yeah. I mean, I watched Wolverine and...
I like Wolverine in Japan.
Yeah, that was a good one.
I like Wolverine versus Silver Samurai.
But First Class was when they got the stride right. Like, First Class is fucking awesome.
Yeah.
But that's where, again... When they reimagined it, that's how they had to do it in order for it to work, I think. Whereas the one that they did, it felt like they were trying to do a version of the cartoon, but trying to do a version of their own at the same time. And it just...
Oh, I see that. I can see that.
It was in between two worlds.
I don't think that at the time the visual artists or the technology were at a level where they could have visualized the cartoon or 90s drawing, the animation or the illustrations, in terms of the complexity of the outfits or the way that their technology worked. Because once we're exposed to the Shi'ar and we realize the way their technology is the way it works, at least the way it's communicated in the comics or the show, they've got organic metals. They've got technology that can anticipate the user's needs. They've got a level of computer sophistication that's like, light years beyond what we actually have right now. But in the 90s, Professor Xavier had developed this technology back in the 90s. So I don't think that could have ever been translated accurately to a screen when they did them.
Right.
Because even the Matrix, like, that doesn't even imagine a level of technology that the Shi'ar would possess.
Well, not the first one. I mean, but at the same time...
No, I mean, in terms of the visual presentation, like, the level of technology that they show us, like, we don't see the fancy, like,
well,
Zion
I mean,
hub
I
or
think
anything.
Because we don't understand what it means for the Sentinels to have evolved is kind of not really communicated, but the Sentinels are like a highly evolved form of technology
Oh yeah.
ultimately. So that's kind of where it's not in our control. So I think that's where, on the one hand, humans don't have that level of technology, but I think the Sentinels ultimately represent that level of technology or more or beyond ultimately, to a certain degree, just because again they are organic
Yeah.
technology. So it's like if it's just being controlled by something or being its own thing, I'm not I don't know if there's a distinction at that point, but that's where the retro
You know,
presentation of
what's interesting is that Sentinels in both universes do the same thing.
yeah, yeah. I mean, but that's what a Sentinel does.
They do the exact same thing in both Matrix and X-Men universe. What is the master mold,
Mm-hmm.
right? So maybe they are the eventuality, the AI that
So I mean, the source.
the
What's the
source.
difference
Yeah,
between the source and
you don't
master
really
mold?
need a. I mean, the name is. Wait, is it? What's that saying about a rose by any other name smells as sweet? Something like that. I don't know. It's the same thing. It's the same story. They accomplish similar goals somehow, or they use a similar trope to accomplish different goals.
Mm-hmm.
That
Because then part of it is, I think, I think in this context, master mold represents what the same thing as the source would be. So then Boulevard Trask would have invented master mold's foundation, and then the other one, the architect, is a representation of the Sentinels being self-aware and inventing themselves. So
well was the Nimrod. Nimrod was a Sentinel developed by the Sentinels, the super mutant hunting
oh yeah,
future Sentinel.
yeah.
Nimrod was incredibly powerful. Nimrod would absorb the powers of the mutants that it could capture and use it. And they hinted at that in the was it Days of Future Past movie, where they sent Wolverine back in time through some psychic thing with a dying Kitty Pryde or whatever. Those Sentinels were incredible. They were fast, and they were almost
Oh yeah.
they used like destroy. They looked like they had destroyer technology almost, but not to cross the streams because those are different story universes from different studios. But there was something about the way they moved, and then they would like absorb the powers of the mutants and kill them. It
Yeah.
was actually a really incredibly brutal scene. I remember thinking like, wow, they really just killed that. Wow, they killed that guy too. They didn't kill Iceman. Fuck.
Yeah.
That's a tough story. Or no, wait, it was they killed they killed Colossus. They killed Storm. They killed a lot of people in that scene. Holy shit.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see what movie deaths, or I mean, I guess universe deaths are permanent because they're already talking about Iron Man coming back. Um, I don't know if it'll be his AI or what, but he definitely he said on I think he said on the Joe Rogan podcast that it's definitely not out of the question.
So I saw it's been circulating. There's a deep fake of Tom Holland and Robert Downey Jr. Faces over Marty McFly and Doc Brown,
That's hilarious.
and it's. I mean, obviously the dialogue is the same voices that we're used to hearing, but to see these faces, it's almost begging for a Back to the Future with those two.
Oh man. Well, at the same time,
I don't know if Robert Downey Jr. wants to do that to his career, assuming the role of Doc Brown, because that's like a level of crazy that.
well, I don't know if that story is done because Christopher Lloyd and Michael J. Fox could still add to it, right? Like,
I don't know. I'm sure Christopher Lloyd could, but Michael J. Fox is.
well, Michael J. Fox was in See You Tomorrow, or see yesterday. He played a teacher in a that was a very small part, but it's like he can still do shit.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think this is where I'm wondering.
Whoa.
Like
Robert Downey Jr. and Tom Holland as Rick and Morty, though. That could be interesting.
Well, even then, I'm wondering if media has tricked us into thinking that reboots are good.
Oh, I'm not saying as a reboot. I'm just saying as keep the story going.
Well, I'm saying in the sense of like, if a story, like when Indiana Jones added Shia LaBeouf, it went in this weird direction, but then they're gonna try to keep it going. So that's where I think it's more so when you take something that is sacred and you either redo it or add to it, I don't think people are gonna respond well in either case for the most part. But then I think it comes down to
I think
the test of time to see if shit is actually.
I think that I think The Rock needs to do a Big Trouble in Little China movie.
I think they had talked about that for a while.
Well, I think he actually. I know. I think it talks.
But then,
but I think he actually needs to do that, and I think that people need to acknowledge that Jack Burton was the comedic relief. And, even though he's a badass in the story,
does the story work? It's because there's all these things.
Is that the end of the Pork Chop Express? Is that the end of Little China?
Maybe, but that's like, are we at a time where we can still make that kind of racist ass movie? And I
feel like they could make it in China.
For sure, but then it's not the same thing. This is what I'm getting at. Is
China.
There's all these things where there's period specific shit where you were allowed to say certain things, you're allowed to do certain things, you're allowed to make fun of certain groups that you can't do now. That made those. Right. So like
that would be a much more serious.
You can't make
now.
Naked Gun now.
Yeah.
Like you go back and watch Naked Gun is not funny anymore. It's I couldn't even sit through the first 5 minutes because it was so bad in what it's doing, the racism, the misogyny, and it's all these low-hanging fruit jokes that only worked in that period. Whereas now, if we tried to remake Naked Gun, it wouldn't work for so many reasons. And then if it did work, it wouldn't be Naked Gun. And that's where I'm saying, like, there's all these things about repurposing stories and media that I'm like, does it actually work, or is Hollywood trying to trick us?
The Naked Gun was based off of Police Story, and it was a TV show, and so it and like I think that was also like they also made fun of it like with Dragnet, and there's this. I think that there's always going to be room for a story that mocks law enforcement, and I think that it might not be using the same language or even trying to utilize the same kind of tone that like Naked Gun or Police Story or Dragnet would have used. But I think there are always going to be stories that lampoon law enforcement. And,
but you have Reno 911.
Exactly.
I'm not saying it's not the same thing though, because even the Reno 911 movie was a completely different form than their TV show.
Well, yeah, I mean, Super Troopers was its own thing.
I mean,
and it spawned, and it was supposed to be Reno 911, but
then they did Tacoma FD,
and that show's so weird.
It's hilarious, but in its own weird way.
Yeah,
and part of it is, it's a running joke. The comedy is not quite there at the beginning of the season, but by the end they have to build the characters.
Well, that's the way it is with all of the Broken Lizard. The way that they wrote all that stuff in the first place, they just those guys are geniuses. I love Broken
Medical
Lizard.
Doctors or Medical Police is lampooning law enforcement, but because of the way that they executed it, it's a spinoff of Children's Hospital, and it's not like I never watched Children's Hospital because of the way Children's Hospital is presented is nothing like Children's Hospital, but there's all these things about Medical Police now that makes me want to watch Children's Hospital because I'm like, oh, maybe I just wasn't ready for children's hospital style of comedy at the time.
Yeah.
But it's also, it does, I think, what would be the modern day fucking Naked Gun type approach, but even then it's so different than I don't know. I guess it's like slapstick and obvious humor, and it also plays on racism, but in a different way. It's like the opposite way, because then they have this period where they're trying to find a terrorist and they're chasing after this Muslim dude, and the whole time they're like, we're not going after him because he's a Muslim, right? And they're like, no, he's just really shady. he was there at the time, so this has nothing to do. It's actually really progressive of us to go after him because he's Muslim, because then it shows that we're equal, and it's like they play off of that. And then by the time they get to the dude, he's like, this is really racist of you guys, right? And they're like, fuck, we thought it was racist, but
We talk ourselves out of it.
So that's where there's this element of like, they go after, it's like the inverse of Naked Gun, but it's the same type of humor now because of the way humor's evolved.
Yeah, it's the way that humor and comedy has changed. It's the same reason we can't have. There's a lot of. So I was going through my inbox. I was like looking into the depths of the thousands of emails that I have that are just kind of languishing, and I found this YouTube video from like 2006, and it stars a young Donald Glover, and it's a fake. It's a satire of Dateline, To Catch a Predator, and it's a bro rape video.
Oh yeah, I remember that. I remember that when that first came out. That shit was hilarious.
It was hilarious when it came out.
But now,
oh my god, now it's
fuck
like
no.
That's
Jesus Christ.
If people tried to make that now,
trigger warning.
Yeah, trigger warning. That's like a career ender right
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Straight up.
Like it's not funny now.
No, it's not at all.
I mean, I don't know if it was fun. It was funny then.
Well, what was funny about it, I thought about this, but what was funny about it then is that we were young and in school. Everyone had been a little bit older than 21 for a couple of years, but everyone that you'd see on campus was dressed like the guys that were being assaulted in these videos. So it's funny because at the time there was this kind of a void within understanding of. I don't even think consent culture existed completely yet. It was still forming, and there were incomplete and poorly formed ideas about physical boundaries and sexual boundary and what relationships were. They hadn't even been defined within like a broader culture. It seemed like everything was still being sorted out.
Yeah,
and so there's a video that targets a group of young men that people see all over the place because that's the style that's being pushed. They were making fun of people who were part of fraternities.
I mean, that's true, but I think that there was probably another layer to it because he has another joke about how men don't have to think about being raped and women do. Yeah. So one of the things about comedy is that in many cases it's used to highlight the problems of society in a way that's digestible, because then you can laugh at it, but then you think about it. So when he's also doing jokes before Me Too had happened, where he's alluding to the fact that men don't have to think about getting raped, and that's something women have to like constantly women have to put their keys in their hands when they're going to the parking lot. Yeah. And it's like funny the way he presents it, but then you think about it like, fuck, this is like a real problem.
That's the thing, is like that comedy routine, that 8 minutes that I hadn't thought about in 15 years or whatever, that couldn't be released today. That couldn't be made at all.
No way.
That dialogue that it would have inspired then
hadn't happened yet.
It hadn't happened yet. It wouldn't even happen now the way that they thought it would have happened.
No. Oh God, no.
And I think that's that's actually kind of cool, because that just shows how far we've come. That we've come to a place where it's like, hey guys, this is really uncomfortably unacceptable. That's kind of nice.
Well, and it's the same shit with like Chappelle's show, where I always look at stuff that's not from our period and think about if it was released today,
Would it work?
Would it work? What would the response be? And half the shit on Chappelle's show would work, and half of it would be like, "What the fuck is this?"
Yeah.
And it's very, some things are very period specific to the point of, have you seen "I'm Gonna Get You, Sucker"?
Yeah.
That's 100% period specific.
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't know if any of that shit would work to
no.
a new audience member today. If somebody was watching that for the
people
first
would be
time in 2020,
incensed. They
yeah,
would
oh god,
freak out.
I mean, they would be like, "Who made this? Who made this fucking anti-black stuff?"
But it was made by Keenan Ivory Wayans.
Right. They would think it was made by some racist person trying to lampoon black culture.
But it was Keenan Ivory Wayans.
Right. And that was an actual black production. Or have you seen Hollywood Shuffle?
Yeah.
Again, if somebody saw Hollywood Shuffle,
they would freak out.
Yeah.
They would not a good freak out.
No,
either.
they'd be like, what Fox News fucking asshole made this Rush Limbaugh bullshit?
Yeah.
And it seems like, it's completely like blaxploitation is this weird period where now I think that's why that Dolomite's My Name movie was good to be made, but it still didn't land on a lot of people because they don't understand.
There's this movie from my childhood called Kentucky Fried Movie.
Mm-hmm.
And there are parts of it that are just, I remember when I met Winston and he came over to my parents' house because we were going to hang out, and my car was at my parents' house, and we're just hanging out, grabbed something to eat. I was like, hey, let's watch this. Didn't even think about it, and I threw that movie on. And so I, eventually I come home and my dad's like, so think you'll see him again? I was like, what do you mean? He's like, I don't know if it was such a good idea to watch that movie. And so I asked him later, he's like, oh no, that was great. I loved it. But there are some parts of that movie now when I watch it where it's like, they're walking on like ice, really thin ice in terms of what is acceptable now. It's like this movie it's weird to feel like something that I watched when I was younger is now something that I would feel apprehensive about screening today with a group of people. He's like, I feel like it would require a disclaimer.
I mean, that's like,
and that's really surreal to me because of the way that the social climate has changed.
Did Harold and Kumar go to Guantanamo Bay really happen?
I think so.
Was that a real thing?
I saw that.
Because that's what I'm like.
But I haven't
There's shit where you hear these movie titles now, and it's like, did somebody really make that movie and think that was okay? Or is this some shit in my mind that I'm imagining? Or can I go Wikipedia that shit and really find a movie that's making fun of people going to Guantanamo Bay? Did that really happen?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
And then they humanized George W.
Yeah. In the same franchise that was making going to White Castle a joke, they make Guantanamo Bay on par with going to White Castle. Okay. That's real.
Well, I mean, going to White Castle is a shitty experience, but I
don't know.
I don't know if it's as bad as getting waterboarded by fucking black ops in Guantanamo.
Well, they just released hand-drawn depictions of what was happening to, what was the dude's name, Abu Sayyid, or there's some dude who was like a lead terrorist, whatever fuck these people are called, and they had him. I'm assuming he was guilty because it sounds like they were torturing him in all these different kinds of ways. But then they depict it in these weird ass cartoons, like somebody from the New Yorker fucking is the one that they hired.
Like Andy Borowitz did the
it's
write-up
like,
for the waterboarding trials. Holy shit.
Because then you see the depictions, you're like, is this supposed to be funny? Like, was this real?
I feel like that's the kind of thing we would see in like Mad Magazine, and it would be like, an Olympic diving well, and they would just have people strapped to the end of diving boards, but I'm not even sure if that can be funny.
Right.
Like, it's like I struggle to find a situation where the concept of waterboarding as it is is really a source of amusement. I feel like that's the kind of thing that we're supposed to be given. We're supposed to see that kind of imagery and be like, "Whoa, no, thank you."
Oh, but I'm like in 2004, left wing humor was making fun of fucking what was the cartoon? It was like, oh, somebody the cartoon is an image of an abstract piece of art, and then somebody's like, I call it the Ascension of the Prophet Muhammad, and then somebody who's apparently a Muslim terrorist comes in and shoots the guy. That was left wing humor in 2004. That wasn't out of fucking right wing. That was out of the New York Times.
Whoa.
New York fucking Times, man. This is supposed to be one of the left wing establishments. They're putting out Islamophobic cartoons making fun of the narrative that was not even real in the first place, because you find out that all this shit about Muslim people being anti-imagery was the narrative was more pushed by Western media and sources than actually existed in the Islamic world. So, like, there were people within the Islamic world at large, but when you break down Sunni and Shia, it's a very select population. It wasn't a majority of people who held this view. And then those people were not aware of the actual Islamic depictions of Muhammad themselves. So then it's because there's been destruction of these things in the history.
So it's like third-hand rage over assumed iconoclasm.
Yes, exactly. So then you have all these right-wing people, well, not even right-wing. At the time, it was left and right-wing people in America presenting this argument as if Muslim people were so easily offended that they get mad and start bombing people over pictures of Muhammad. And this became a common refrain so much that it was even left-wing people who were using this narrative.
It's such a strange mechanism to inspire people to develop prejudice.
But do you remember that? Do you remember that narrative?
Well,
It's so far gone because it was so incorrect, and once it got debunked.
wait, there was that. There was
Charlie Hebdo.
Yeah, the Charlie Hebdo shooting, bombing. Was it a bombing?
I think it was a shooting.
It was a shooting.
I believe.
I don't
it's
I
been
don't
so
like
long.
it's just a shooting, but no, they got shot up. But we've got Mad Magazine and Cracked and The New Yorker, and that's just three that I can think of, and those are mainstream. And there's an entire world of not quite mainstream satire and cynicism comic, like political satire comics, that all they do is rail on whatever they've decided is their, the imagined outrage of the day.
Which they follow a lot of mainstream sentiment, so they'll look at CNN or Fox News or whatever and just duplicate that in a lot of cases.
So it's funny. I feel like a year ago we were talking about how it seemed like people were having problems identifying. Well, they kept calling it fake news, but we've been calling it tabloids for decades. Tabloids have always existed.
Right.
People just
and propaganda before that.
Yeah. And so we know that these things exist. So it's the same thing as same shit, different decade.
Yeah.
But now we're also into this other place.
Well, because even then, do you remember that brief period where there was Korean tabloids that were video, that were exaggerated versions of verbatim news stories coming out of America? So if it was like,
well, I mean, I'm trying to think about how this actually. So we have this spectrum of fake news, of alternative facts, and then it goes towards like honest, truth, fact-based journalism But then you go even further in that direction, and then eventually you end up with satire and cynicism. And I'm not even going to include like satirical op-ed because that, or sorry, sarcastic op-ed, because a good satire is a good satire. But anyways, it's
Well, and then there's also sardonic.
oh yeah, well that's even further.
Yeah.
So at a point, it's I don't think it helps either. Going one way in towards tabloid or the other direction towards like super cynical, verging on sardonic.
I mean, I guess it depends on what the point is, because if the point is for people to get a sort of cathartic laugh at something that is inherently not funny, mission accomplished, maybe. I don't know, but it has to be actually funny, and these things are not actually funny.
Wait, that's
in a lot of the cases.
That's like suggesting that we'd be proud of the failure just because they tried. That's a participation trophy.
But then you laugh at it.
But it has broader implications downstream.
Right.
It's even worse.
And that's where it's like, there's this weird gap of what is the person reading this wanting to have done to them? Because I had a professor present it to, I mean, not just to me. His presentation is that media can only do to you what you allow it to do to you. In that, if you have a piece of media that makes you cry, that's because you only let that media make you cry. If you have a piece of media that makes you happy, it's only because you let that piece of media make you happy. So in this case, what is someone who's looking at a satirical cartoon or satirical discussion of a subject, or a sardonic discussion of a subject for that matter, what are they getting out of this, unless it's just that they love to revel in
Schadenfreude.
Yeah. I mean, and even that, they might just love to revel in the discussion of strife, whether it's their strife, someone else's strife, some unknown third party strife, because then this might be that their brains have then become wired to release dopamine when they're discussing other people's demise or other people's strife, or even their own, because that's where, if you are able to trick your own brain into dropping dopamine when you're discussing your own problems, I guess you kind of won, because then even your problems get you happy.
Yeah.
In a weird way.
Man, you just described Skeletor to me. Somebody who like experiences dopamine and endorphin rush when they are discussing the demise of others. That's that's totally some fucking Skeletor level shit right there.
Yeah. Oh. But that's also probably every supervillain who's looking at the fucking plan to blow everything up, and they're just having their heart beat out of their fucking chest from excitement. Like, who are these people?
No, Dr. Evil's definitely not like that. Dr. Evil's he just wants $1 million so he can build another laser.
Well, that's why that character is also fun.
Yeah.
Because we know he's a lampoon of villains, and his actual motivations are really, like, he's the most petty of the villains, and in that, his pettiness actually makes him not a villain. He's actually just always on the verge of having options that are bad for other people, because then when he's given the options to do shit that's not necessarily bad for other people, but he can still get his way, he takes those options. So he's like, this is why that character is interesting, and that's why we had that whole Austin Powers 3 where he's playing the fucking piano with Mini-Me, and that shit works because we don't actually hate the guy, because we know his motivations are like, he just wants to be loved. He just wants to have fucking Frau, what's her name?
Bismarck or whatever.
I forget her name. Frau, whatever Frau. He just wants to have some time with the Frau.
Yeah. He just wants his kid not to hate him.
Yeah, Seth Green.
Yeah.
Before he was big. Yeah. Man, yeah, you go back. You remember Kevin Hart in 40-Year-Old Virgin? He would not do some shit like that today. Whereas,
Oh God, his character. Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? It's funny to see the time when in somebody's career when they're not yet big, but they still are doing shit where there's just this whole segment in that movie of him arguing with
The what amounts to a Best Buy or something. Like
yeah, over getting a fucking discount, and it's like,
and he like threatens the.
it's so absurd. There's no reason for that section of the movie.
I feel like he did that scene on a platform.
I wouldn't doubt it, but the other dude's pretty short too.
I know, but those TVs, like, there's something about the way the everything is like scaled in that scene.
Oh man, yeah, because I can't remember the other guy's name, but he was in Blades of Glory. It's Will Ferrell's lover / the coach, or not Will Ferrell's lover. It was
the other guy.
the other guy's the coach's lover. Was it? It's not Rip Torn. The older dude.
Yeah, I know. Every time I think of that movie, I just laugh about what's his name, John Heater, doing that swan pose.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that movie was really fun.
Yeah.
That's what happened to Ice Capades. They made a movie with
Blades of Glory,
yeah,
and ridiculed it.
Blades of Glory, and then just made everyone's like, oh, we better keep quiet about this.
Yeah, no more escapades.
I mean, I know that ice skating as a sport still exists.
Oh, yeah,
and
of
people
course.
are still actively pursuing like ice skating athletically, and then
I'm sure escapades still exist. We just don't have kids.
that's got to be it. Because like,
and we're not creeps.
dude,
We're not weirdos going to ice capades and fucking
legit
Taylor Swift
would
concerts without kids.
I would not even acknowledge the existence of like Marvel on Ice.
Like, when's the last time you've heard about a circus?
I'm pretty sure that Barnum and Bailey and Ringling Brothers had to shutter.
That's not the only circus that exists.
I know, but those are the ones that had like big.
But I'm
global
saying,
names.
you're not looking at fucking circus, anything where a circus is being advertised, because you're not that demographic, and the algorithms are good enough to know that now.
Yeah.
And you're not getting shit for fucking intravaginal meshes or anything like that either.
Oh Lord, I'm not trying to.
Because I seen plenty of those commercials when I went to Planet Fitness. I didn't even know intravaginal mesh existed until I saw the fucking commercial for it, where it's like, okay, I guess now I'm part of this assumed demographic. But then you realize the daytime television demographic is the one that gets all those medical commercials thrown at them, because everybody assumes it's some old person on fucking disability or Medicaid or some shit that's sitting at home. It's like, oh, do you have this problem? Go to your doctor and ask about this fucking medication, because you're probably sitting there wondering what's wrong with you right now.
So I want to say about 3 months ago, I signed up for a free Jack Link's sausage or beef jerky thing. They were going to send me a beef jerky for free in the mail. I just had to answer some questions. Mm-hmm. And so I created an online personality because I didn't want to give them my real information. And lo and behold, they sent it. And Sheila opened it and ate one of them, which I thought was amusing. She's like, "Who's this person on this address?" I was like, "That's me." She's like, "What? You have an alias?" It's like, "No, this is just so I can get free stuff from the internet."
How many are they gonna send?
They sent me 2. I thought they were gonna send me more, but I haven't received any more.
Well, if anybody's listening, Class Action Rebates allows you to go find any sort of class action lawsuit that you might be part of or that you think you might be a part of and you can't remember, wink, wink. Because what happens is if people get to be part of a class action lawsuit. Well, if a class action lawsuit gets filed and not enough people go into the fucking rebate pool, then the money just goes to the system.
Yep.
And it's like there's all this money basically that ends up getting devoted to
That's
paying
not being
back people.
distributed or dispersed.
Yeah, so that's where it's like, you know, I did that shit for a while, and I mean, there was shit that I was legitimately part of, because then it's like you have to prove it in some cases. So even in the cases where I had to prove it, it would be like, oh, I get $100 here, or sometimes 20. I wouldn't even do it unless it was at least worth 15 or 20 bucks.
You know, I have a rebate. I think I have like $100 or $200 in rebate that I'm unable to collect because I can't produce the receipt because I purchased some microphones years and years ago. They came with a special rebate, $200 a piece, $100 rebate per mic, and I sent in the rebate form, and they never sent me my money. They never sent me a check. And so years later, one of my buddies like, hey, I just checked rebate.com or whatever. And he's like, you're owed this much money. And I was like, first off, cool. Second, why the hell are you looking my name up? And he's like, oh, I just go here and I see what everyone's doing. And I'm like, cool.
That's super random.
That's really kind of crazy. Like, cool, why not? Yeah. And so I go look it up, and it's like, lo and behold, it's these mics, the rebate from these microphones that I never was able to claim. And so I go and try and follow through the process, and they're like, please produce your receipts and all your proof of purchase. And it was something that I bought when I was maybe 19, and so I didn't have a profile on Musician's Friend. I hadn't created an account. I just bought something without registering.
Yeah.
There's no way I can trace this down. So there's like $200 that the the government or the rebate universe is like waving at me like, hey buddy, over here, we're waiting for you, just prove who you are.
Yeah, man, that shit sucks.
Yeah, it's just one of those, I don't know what
lost money. It's weird how lost money makes you feel weird, like it makes you feel bad about yourself, as if you did something wrong even fucking years later. And it's like,
well, it's
so much conditioning goes into that.
The internet's like letting me know that at some point in my life I didn't follow through on a rebate properly, and so it cost me.
I mean, even if you lose $10, like that sinking pit feeling in your gut of like, fuck, I lost $10. It's so weird that type of emotional response can happen from.
When I think about the amount of money that I've spent on microphones or preamps or any of that kind of stuff.
Or like that shitty microphone from China that didn't work.
Holy crap. So
I mean, so you felt like you just threw fucking $35 away, right?
Yeah.
It's a life experience.
Look,
but it's not the microphone you got or you wanted.
So we use here in the base capsule. We've got 3 of the same microphones. They're made by a company called Neewer. It's the NW700. These were the cheap mics. They were like $15, and an extra $15 I got some stands, and I already owned a bunch of cables and all that. But that doesn't matter. So these things were cheap as can be, and I bought them knowing I don't have high expectations. Let's just see how this goes. And lo and behold, I feel like we get a good result. It sounds pretty good. They work just fine. So I thought, hey, Chinese microphone, maybe it's not all horrible. And so I went back to eBay, and I found this microphone, which is a knockoff of a Lewitt LCT 240, I think. Anyways, I purchased this thing just on looks alone because I couldn't find a website for it with any real information, and I saw several different listings on eBay that all had different information. And I thought,
looks cool.
It looked cool. I mean, it has a XLR connector like a real microphone. So I get this thing in the mail, and I plug it in, and it's a condenser, so I figure it needs phantom power. And I turn it on, and all I hear is static or like foamy, just snow, just, and it's just, what the fuck's going on? And so I turn it off, and nothing. and later I plug it back in. I'm just trying, and eventually I get it to pass sound. But I had to turn the preamp gain on the mixer up to like 60 decibels, which is, oh, wait, 40 decibels. And then I had to turn the channel mixer volume up so it had plus 10. And then I still had to turn the main mix up another plus 10. And then I still had to turn the headphone volume up almost all the way before I could hear anything.
Damn.
And so it's like, what the? This thing is fucking junk. So I'm just waiting for the people in China to be like, okay, we'll refund you your money. Because this is clearly not my first microphone. And I'm pretty sure that I can identify when it's not passing signal properly. So
Yeah.
here's the interesting part. They offered to send me a replacement microphone. So, at no additional charge, which means that it costs less to ship 2 of these than what I paid for one. And they still make enough money to make it worthwhile.
Yeah.
And also I believe that it costs considerably more to ship it back than it did for them to ship it here.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just waiting for eBay to do their thing, because I don't want to pay for something that is junk. Like, other than looking cool, it's junk.
And that's the...
So that kind of satisfied my curiosity with cheap Chinese microphones. I might get another one of these newer NW700s so that we have, a complete set, and then I'll just be done with looking for microphones for our exceptional Randos series.
I'm just wondering, there's a period where companies were not necessarily forced, but they had to basically give lifetime guarantees that their shit's gonna work. So if you buy a fucking microphone or a washer, dryer, they're gonna fix it if it breaks. Because then that's why they make it so it doesn't break in the first place, because then they don't want to fix it. At what point... I didn't ask for shit to break when I buy it. There's some weird point in Western civilization where people thought it was okay to start selling shit that breaks as long as you bought it. You bought it. And there's this weird cultural acceptance of being able to buy things that don't work, that didn't used to exist. Because I'm like, where did that come from? Our parents' generation always laments about this shit, and how when they bought blah, 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 you didn't have to worry about it breaking. Well, we didn't ask for this. When did it fucking happen? Like, did you start asking for shit to start breaking? Did you? I don't remember asking.
Well, I think... So what I noticed, what I've learned when I embarked on this, microphone journey, is there are some companies in China that have been manufacturing microphones for other companies for a long time. So there's one 797 Audio, and they've been manufacturing microphones for all manner of big names for a long time, and they have a very high level of quality control. They were trained by German engineers. The company was started with German engineering, and so they're a highly regarded company. And then there are manufacturers that basically supply, like this microphone. The microphones that we use are not manufactured by Neewer. They're privately labeled by Neewer. The capsules are available on the market. They're manufactured by some other company. The electronics are designed by... They might be designed in-house, but they're based off of some other company's design, most likely, because China. And then this microphone is given several different names across, 24 brands.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just the desire for everyone to have their own brand of something that has diluted the market. And so it also allows for exorbitant prices to exist for really fancy stuff. So that same company, 797, they make a microphone called the NT2A, which incidentally shares its name with a microphone by a company called Rode, the NT2. and I think it's NT2A as well, actually. And they have identical specifications, the same body, capsule, everything's the same. And at some point, Rode moved their manufacturing from China to Australia. But the company 797 retained all the machining and all the necessary tools to build the same microphone. So, a company in Europe called Behringer, which is like, they've been around for a while. They've been embroiled in many a lawsuit over IP infringement. They went through phases where their equipment was notoriously fragile and had quality control issues. But I see them in Sweetwater catalogs and on Sweetwater's website, and I feel like Sweetwater is the kind of place that has very strict standards for the kind of equipment that they sell. And I don't think that they would have brought something like Behringer online without having really, upped their quality control. Because I don't think Sweetwater wants to deal with that kind of stuff.
Right. Because then that looks bad on Sweetwater.
Yeah, for even being associated with a brand that has those kinds of issues. So I think that they've probably changed a lot in the last few years.
I mean, that's the same with Bose changing in a bad way, because
yeah, people got complacent with Bose.
Yeah, their brand used to be the top tier of sound, and now it's
it's funny because it's funny how far the mighty have fallen. Because at one point they were doing these really advanced equalization circuits and speaker cabinet designs that were designed to excite an entire room, to make it a room full of sound as opposed to just a cube that kind of emitted sound. And I remember seeing all these speakers that were like, not only did it make a room sound good, but the speakers looked interesting. And now everything's like, tuned cabinet this and matched amplification and custom crossover network, and all these things are good. I'm not complaining about that kind of stuff on the component level. That's awesome. But at some point, all the cabinets, they stopped looking interesting and they became extremely utilitarian. Yeah, it's just one of those things. Like design trends. I think there's a long phase where all the buildings look the same because that's when development occurs. But then you see the next development down the road. It happened a decade later, and all the trends that had changed are reflected in all of those buildings. And sometimes I wonder, like, how long it takes for certain trends to come back around.
Well, and that's weird too, because then if everybody is building their own house, the byproduct of everyone having to do their own construction is going to create differences, because then everybody's preferences are going to be displayed. So I'm not sure unified aesthetic would have emerged first. I feel like varied aesthetic would have emerged before unified aesthetic, because then it's like in that.
I feel like a unified aesthetic would have emerged early because of a lack of resources.
I mean, that's an assumption, but that's where I'm getting at in that.
I mean,
if we're talking about huts versus,
I'm just going back to like log cabins.
But I'm saying even then, if you're building a log cabin, because you're building it yourself, then you're not going to be limiting yourself based on.
Well, that's true.
Like money or anything like that, and then you're going to design it based on your personal aesthetic anyway. So every log cabin that was built in the early stages was probably actually super unique in many cases. So that's where I'm saying, like, if you know how to create the infrastructure to make a house, and also you know how to build that house on your own by cutting the fucking trees down, and you don't have to then limit yourself. It's like, I wouldn't assume every log cabin's just 4 walls and a roof if they don't have to limit it. Like, if it doesn't have to be limited by money, and it's only limited by the number of trees that are in your immediate area, which are probably in very heavily wooded areas in the first place.
And then it just comes down to your ability to design the floor plan.
Because then those people, they're not building neighborhoods of log cabins. No. These are people who are living in sparse areas in the first place. So that's where I'm like, there's all these things even in early civilizations that had apartment-like structures, like there were different apartment complexes, and
Hmm.
that's where it's like, even fuck, man, 4,000-year-old Chinese buildings don't all look the same at all. There's there's plenty of variation.
Yeah, but the ones
Like,
that look similar are very clearly built at the same time.
right, yeah, yeah. But even in that, it's
But I
like,
think that's more of a reflection of a certain builder being alive and in a certain area, specific area,
hmm
more than anything.
and that's what it is. That's what it comes
So
down
I
to. Is like, it's ultimately.
so it'll take longer. It would take longer to get to a unified building structure because it would take longer for that one technique to have resulted in being like the technique that's being used
Right.
predominantly.
It has to proliferate through a union or a guild type
Yeah, but
structure.
when I see these like pop up suburbs just like appear, when they're just like poof, all of a sudden there's 30 or 40 houses in what used to be a kind of a forest area.
Mm.
They all look the same.
Oh, for sure. I mean, because they're all using the same
Yeah.
like
They're using the same.
floor plans in
They're
a lot of
using
cases.
one of the 5 floor plans that all have the same square footage and the
Yep.
same rooms. It's
Yep.
just they put the block in some other part of the.
Well, it's just like my parents' house has a twin, at least one twin in Geist. That's the same floor plan, but it's different materials, so the colors are different. And the it looks different, but it's the same exact house.
Well, that's good because you want to be able to wake up and know which building you're in. If you had 2 houses that
Yeah.
were identical but in different locations,
Well, but even then,
the effort you would
like
have to go through to keep them
my
within
parents'
this.
house is on a hill, and theirs is on
Mm,
a flat cul-de-sac, so it looks different just from that. Like the
yeah.
placement of the house, then you start to realize how that shit affects the way a house looks, and
It's like when you're traveling and you stay at like one type of hotel over and over again because you got some kind of corporate account set up,
hmm
and after a while you get really used to the rooms layouts being all the same in
hmm
every place because those things are designed or decided at very high levels. I can
Yeah.
only imagine that if you spend enough time traveling that you would end up, you know, eventually just not knowing where you are.
Yeah, that happens for sure. I mean,
Yeah, that kind of business level, travel level burnout got to be just
it's not fun.
like a special. That's a special kind of personality.
I think people who haven't done it would assume that it's fun,
Oh no, it sounds horrible.
and it's fun for like the first couple of times, but when you have to do it, it's, oh my god, it's especially just the process of traveling in the first place. It, I don't know if well, obviously 9/11, blah blah blah. It didn't used to be this difficult to go through an airport, but
Yeah,
now that it's so difficult, the entire you lose an entire day when you travel on a
yeah.
plane. Anytime, it doesn't matter if it's a local flight where you're going like 2 hours, or if it's a fucking 6 hour flight. That entire day is shot just because it zaps your energy levels, and it's
Oh
like,
yeah. Well, there have been speaking of Google News and feeds, things like that. I saw this article. It was an opinion piece. And it said the definitive guide to reclining your seat on an airplane. And I thought, oh really?
oh my god, yeah.
Because I'm pretty sure that's like one of those you know, issues of contention that has existed since they started mashing the seats together.
Did you see the recent outrage that's caused the debate to resurface?
Oh, was it the guy that was punching someone's?
Yeah, yeah. So
Punching their seat.
that's why that debate has reemerged, because now that lady is talking about pressing charges,
Yeah.
which I don't blame her, because people get super entitled on planes, man. It's like, obviously it's the airline's fault for putting people at odds because they could have staggered seats in the first place.
Yeah.
But now that we're faced with this situation where people feel entitled to tell other people, like, you can't recline your seat, That's just weird. Only a white dude in America would try to tell somebody.
I'm
Because
pretty.
I guarantee if that was a dude in that seat, he wouldn't have been punching that shit. And he only did it because it was a woman.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that if you pay for a seat, you've paid for every capability that it can provide you.
Mm-hmm.
You've also paid for the space underneath the seat in front of you,
Yep.
and you've paid for that tray attached to the seat in front of you, as well as the pocket in front of you.
Which I definitely have had situations where, I've had people kick my seat and they didn't say anything to me. And it's like, it was dudes. It was always dudes. I never had a woman kick my seat. But then if I turned around and looked at them, they didn't say shit. They aren't going to fucking say shit to me if I actually engage them, because that gives them like, oh, you want to fucking get tough? You want to say something? Go ahead, say it. Nope, fucking get quiet. And then what happens is, if I was a woman, then you get that dude who's punching the seat, fucking talking all kinds of shit. Then she calls the flight attendant, and then the dude gets sided with.
Yeah.
So it's like, I've been in the spot on a flight where I know if I was a woman, it would not have gone my way. But it's because that every time somebody's in that spot, they will defer to the man for whatever reason. It's like, I mean, and I think what ends up happening also is when you're in a tight space, everybody goes real animalistic real quick.
Yeah.
So if you're like, that dude was trying to alpha out on that lady, and she was trying to alpha out back in the only way she knew possible. So that's kind of where it's like, that whole alpha thing got talked about because of the Rogan show or the Rogan podcast, but I don't think people really understood what the implications of the reemergence of alpha culture as a thing really means. But then when you're talking about people who don't understand gestures in the first place, people don't get micro gestures or micro facial expressions in most cases.
Yeah.
So they're not going to get hierarchical displays of behavior and what those things are meant to do, because they don't watch the fucking Discovery Channel or Planet Earth or whatever. So they're not informed enough to know when a dude's peacocking or alphaing out or whatever. It's just to fucking display a certain machismo. He's not actually. He's trying to display that he's more of a threat than he actually is, because the whole display is meant to try to get him in a position to be in control, to put everybody else at slight enough at ease that they won't call the cops, but they'll just fucking sit in their seats.
I think I read the results of NASA research concluded that personality type is not suited for deep space missions.
Yep. And
Not
that's
suited
exactly right, man. Because they always try to fucking take over.
Yeah.
They will not be good in group dynamics where a small group needs to cooperate, because they will always try to take over. And that's exactly what you're saying, is that they don't play well with others.
Yeah. Well,
So contrary to all these fucking movies where we see Brock Sampson in space,
yeah, no.
that dude is not going on a NASA mission.
No, there's none of that. It's,
Brock Sampson.
It's 100% like, guys, we got to form Voltron and do this.
Mm-hmm. Yep. You have to be able to rely that other people will put the team above themselves and not do it for glory or for hubris and or out of hubris. And that's like one of that demographic's biggest problems is over belief in self.
Yeah, I think that rock and roll both epitomized and also ushered the decline of the band itself.
Yeah.
Because
that's very true.
They had to come together to form those groups and to make that music, but at the same time, the rock star emerged, and it might be the singer, it might have been the guitar player. It was usually one of those two. Sometimes it was the same person who did both.
The rock star killed the rock and roll band.
Yeah. Poor bastards. Exceptional Radio. Exceptional Randos Show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening. Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio.